Okay, now it looks like we have everybody through the food line, so without any further ado, we have Father Joachim and Brother Barnabas.
Can you hold this, Joe? Joachim, all I can say right now is, and you have my sword! Okay, I had to do that before we started. So welcome everybody to Mary, Queen of Saints Parish. Whether you are a parishioner of, perfect time to fall asleep. Don't fall asleep, because this will be fun. So whether you're a parishioner here, or whether you are from elsewhere, actually my dad and my brother came the whole way out from Johnstown, Pennsylvania over there. Say hello to them. And actually, just so you know, my dad and my brother were the ones that got me into Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. My brother Russ, who's over here, actually convinced me one day, whenever I was a young lad, he said, "Hey, Mike," because that used to be my name. He said, let's make our own rendition of the Lord of the Rings. I was like, okay, not very motivated, but your older brother asked you to do something, you do it. So I said, what do you need me to do? Well, my brother Russ said, well, I'll be the cameraman, and our younger brother Patrick will be Frodo. I said, okay. He goes, and you will be every other character of the entire movie. So we indeed did make this. But maybe you'll see it after I get ordained. So, anyway, I just wanted to ask Father Joachim to start us out, giving some thank yous to kind of some people pulling this thing together.
Okay, I might forget somebody, so please forgive me in advance because a lot of people have been involved with this. So first up, Brother Barnabas to deal with my questions and watching Lord of the Rings again and again and again and again. The extended editions are 3 to 4 hours, and they were on a lot. Let's see. Okay, people in the back. So I can't see everyone. So Teresa, she made the cloaks that we're wearing, and then there's also an extra cloak for raffle. Ashley for helping make the baskets. You will notice that one of the baskets is a potato basket with instant potatoes, I think some potato chips, and potato vodka. Okay? So we're having fun. Also, Mrs. Lettieri for getting in touch with her son Joe, who lives in New Zealand. That's where we got some of the jackets. And also the book that is not The Lord of the Rings, is a book that he helped write along with Peter Jackson, and he autographed. So it's something cool to check out. And then in the words of Sam Wise, thanks to my old gaffer. That's what he calls his dad. So my dad, pretty much this whole week, looked up recipes, found things, and even preparing the salted pork like a month or so in advance, along with the beer. So a lot of work went into the food, and as I can tell, I think people are happy with it. So, I have to talk first and earn my dinner, so I'll be eating afterwards. Okay, so I know there's other people, but I can't see everyone. Kenise, did I miss anyone?
Trish helped with the decoration.
Thank you, Trish, who had to go to a wedding. And then Krista, Gemma, and Becky helped with the door of Durin. So if you've seen the movies, you know that these are the doors that get you to Moria or Khazad-dûm. So you'll notice that it says in English, speak friend and enter. So if you say Malone, that is the password to get in. Okay. So again, I probably forgot someone. I'm bad at this. This is why I need notes. But again, thank you for everyone that has helped to make this night possible.
Okay, are you ready? Shall we begin?
Yes.
Let's do it. Once upon a time, there was a man named J.R.R. Tolkien. So, we're going to start out just talking about our friend Tolkien, because I know that when it comes to the Lord of the Rings and stuff, some people are like, die hard, I've read the books, I've seen the movies, I know the Apocrypha. Some people are like, I have no idea what that is. Is it like Star Wars? I'm just here to have food and hang out with you guys. So basically the first question tonight is, why should Catholics be aware, if not perhaps a little bit interested, in the Lord of the Rings? And the first point is because of who wrote it, right? So J.R.R. Tolkien is the author of the Lord of the Rings. And he is a great example of a Catholic layman who has kind of taught us how to bring the gospel message through his own witness and through his own creative juices. So before we get to that, I want to ask Father Joachim just to give a couple words on his life growing up.
So J.R.R. Tolkien was born in the late 1800s in South Africa to an English couple. Sorry, I'm like really excited, so I will speak slower. Okay. You've heard me preach, you know how I talk at this point. Okay. So he was born in South Africa to an English couple, and at a young age, he went back to England with his mom and his brother. But unfortunately, his father died unexpectedly, and it didn't make sense to go back to South Africa, so they stayed in England. But surprisingly, his mom decided to become Catholic. And to become Catholic at this point in England was suicide. You were not going to get support. You would be ostracized. You would be, cast out of the family. And that's pretty much what happened. And then sadly, she died at a young age from diabetes. So Tolkien and his brother were taken in by a priest and were raised. So fast forward a few years, he does amazing in his studies. He ends up becoming a professor at Oxford. And the thing is that he really loves stories. But the thing is, unfortunately for England, they didn't have legends. Now you might think, well, wait, Father, King Arthur. That's actually French. Or Welsh. It comes from those countries. So he had a desire to write a legend for England. And through his studies, he was big into Beowulf, Norse mythology, and things like that, that he started to write a story. And the story goes that one day he was grading students' papers, and all of a sudden, he flipped on the back and wrote, "In the hole in the ground lived a hobbit." And that is the beginning of the book, The Hobbit. So this is where he ends up going and writing. If you have time, you can come and see some of the books that I have of his. So the French one is just there to show my nerdiness, okay? But he took time to create cultures, he took time to invent languages, and he took time to share a story that speaks to us in a very human way.
So let me share a brief story with you that might be one of the most important points about the life of J.R.R. Tolkien to know about, all right? This is where it becomes relevant for you. So our friend Tolkien, like Father Joachim said, was a teacher at Oxford in England. And one of his buddies, who some of you might recognize, was C.S. Lewis, right? C.S. Lewis eventually wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, another wonderful fictional story, as well as other great Christian classics. But the thing was, Lewis actually, for a good chunk of his life, was a devout atheist. And it was by meeting and having a conversation with our friend Tolkien that he was convinced of the truth of the gospel. So how did this happen? Well, once upon a time, Tolkien and Lewis went for a walk along this path at Oxford, Addison's Walk. And the story goes like this. They were walking along one day, and Tolkien decided to try to talk to Lewis about Jesus. But he didn't just go straight up and start talking about Jesus. He kind of went through, if the sacraments in the Mass are the front door of the church, as I like to say, Tolkien decided to take Lewis through the back door. The back door of the church, which is truth and goodness and beauty. Things that the human heart are always attracted and looking for. So Tolkien did that by beginning to talk about their common interest in the wonderful, beautiful, fictional stories that they like to read and eventually write. And he said, Lewis, isn't there something beautiful about stories? In particular, he pointed out two aspects of fictional stories that I think are still relevant for us today. He said, there's a type of story that we all believe, which is called having a primary belief, right? So if I said, how many of you guys were at Mass with Father Knies tonight over at church, you'd be like, yeah, I believe that happened. I was there. I remember that because you actually experienced it, right? So that's primary belief. A story you know is true because you were there. But then there's the kind of story that you know never happened, that you know is fictional, but it has something of secondary belief in it. Secondary belief being that even though I know it's not true or real, it still feels like it's happening. We all experience that when we watch a good movie and you realize your muscles are tensed up and you're like, why am I all fired up right now watching a scene happen? Or when you read a book and you can't help but turn the pages wondering what's going to happen with the characters. And Tolkien said it's this type of secondary belief that draws us in. So even when you turn on a good movie or read a good book and you're not interested, eventually the characters and the plot really just suck you in. And even though when you know it's done and you close the book and you know it's not real, something about it still feels like it is, right? So that's his first point that he brought to Lewis. He said there's something about good fictional stories that does feel indeed true. Lewis said, okay, carry on. Tolkien said, all right, there's a second point about stories that draw our human heart. He said, well, what kind of secondary belief are we most attracted toward as humans? And Tolkien said, it's the kind of stories that have the following things. A supernatural world. A place that's beyond what we experience here. He said stories that have underlying realities of death being conquered, especially in a heroic way. He said stories that have a love that never ends, a love that is eternal. He said stories that good absolutely triumphs over evil, and stories where victory is snatched from the jaws of defeat. Basically the fairy stories that we read, which seem, so cliche, but Tolkien said all through the ages, even now in our empirical, scientific, world of whatever kind of stories we can make, not increase that even now, of even more technology, we can make whatever stories we want. There's still the type of story, the fairy stories, that Tolkien argues that's still what we want to pay for most, read most, and seek out through all the ages. And Tolkien said then the additional point. Lewis said, okay, carry on, for sure. Tolkien said, but why is it? Why is it that we love these stories so much? He said this. He goes, perhaps it's because we're made in the image and likeness of God. So there's something in us that's drawn to these stories. Even though at factual level, we know they're not real. Even though we know that one day we will all die. Even though we know that we do eventually have to say goodbye to our loved ones. Even though we know that sometimes it seems like evil does triumph over good. That these fictional stories, as they're walking around here, he said these fictional stories really do capture us how things seem like they should be. But then the reality is, they're not actually like that. And Lewis said, yeah, there is something that draws our hearts, but really it doesn't matter. Because all these stories, Lewis said, are simply lies breathed through silver. They're very beautiful lies that we just tell one another to escape from the harsh reality that we actually exist in. And Tolkien said to Lewis, they're not lies. And here's why I say they are not lies. Tolkien said, look at the story of Jesus Christ. He said, in the Gospels, you find everything that you could want in a story. You find death being conquered forever. You find a love that never ends. You find Jesus inviting us to an eternal, supernatural world, the kingdom of heaven. You find victory in the most unexpected place through heroic virtue and absolute good triumphing over evil. Tolkien said that it's in the story of Jesus Christ, in the gospel, that we experience the fullness of all of these stories. And he said, but what makes the story of Jesus different than all the other stories? That Jesus has risen from the dead. That it is not only true, it's also real. And he says, because of that, Lewis, we can actually have all those things that our hearts are looking for in all of these other stories when we come to Jesus. And Tolkien, he went on to even further say that all the stories point to the gospel. All of the stories that we love throughout the ages of myths and fairy tales, of these deep truths, point to the gospel. And that Jesus' story is not just another underlying reality within our hearts that we're looking for, but that Jesus is the underlying reality in all of these stories. So, Lewis, being kind of blown away by this, they went late into the night talking about all this. And Tolkien took all this information. He wrote a lot of this in his book called On Fairy Stories. He talks about how to understand why the human heart, for ages upon ages, loves stories. Even to the point of this. You hear one of us preaching, right? And you kind of get bored until last week I went down to the mall and all of a sudden you perk up. You're like, oh, he's telling a story. I wonder what this is about. There's something in us that's interested in a great story. So, what's the story we're actually talking about tonight that I think can reveal the gospel to us and reveal our own Catholicism in a kind of unique way, all right? Well, that is the story of Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings. Joachim.
So, Brother Barnabas, let me just read from the Silmarillion and go all the way through. So, this is a very quick summary, because again, I point to the books of how much Tolkien wrote, okay? After he died, his son Christopher had the responsibility of compiling all his notes. If that doesn't make him a saint, I don't know what does, okay? But we can say that we are in the Second Age, and there is a Dark Lord named Sauron. And he desires power. He desires to dominate. And the way he decides to do this is create a ring of power. So this ring of power will enable him to take over all of Middle-earth. But before he can reach full power, a war breaks out. And the king has fallen. And his son takes up the broken sword and cuts off the finger of Sauron, and the ring is separated from him. He loses his power. He's not destroyed, but he's extremely weakened. This is the moment where man could show his worth and destroy evil forever. But evil is attractive. And unfortunately, the son takes the ring for himself. But he is betrayed. The ring gives him up, and he is killed. And the ring then disappears for generations. It's not until Smeagol, Gollum, is fishing, and a friend of his finds the ring in the river, and Smeagol, Gollum, kills him and takes it. And he was kind of like a hobbit at this point. Not total hobbit, but hobbit-like. And if you've seen the movie, if you look at the poster, you realize that evil corrupts him. Evil takes on a form, and it makes him afraid of light. It makes him go into darkness. He lives under a mountain for like 500 years, okay? And so happens that one day, Bilbo, the Hobbit, is in this same mountain, and he finds the ring by accident. And he doesn't realize what this ring is for. He realizes it's magical, he uses it here and there, and eventually he reaches the age of 11, that's 111, and he's ready to go on to his next stage of life. And that's where Frodo comes in. And he is given the ring of evil, the ring of power. And after much research and much time, if you've seen the movies, it looks like a week has passed, but in the book, it's 17 years. Okay? Tolkien wasn't one to rush things. So after 17 years, he realizes that he needs to leave, and he needs to go on this mission. That he needs to be the one that's going to take this ring to destroy it. Now the thing is that Sauron, the Dark Lord, is gaining power, and battles and wars are breaking out. So the thing is that they have to destroy this ring, but they don't want to draw any attention to themselves. So they end up having a council and decide on 9 characters to be able to go on this mission to destroy the ring, to destroy evil.
Okay, you still with us? So the Spartan Pittsburgh version of what you just said is basically there's a bad guy named Sauron, kind of like the Cleveland Browns, who has something real bad, and the Steelers, for the Fellowship, have to go and destroy them. Good? So the first player on this team of the Fellowship is Gandalf, right? Gandalf the Grey, who eventually becomes Gandalf the White, right? Gandalf, more or less, we're going to talk about him more soon, but what to know about him, he's the leader of the crew. He's a wizard, and he's the kind of the guy that has been thinking about this longer than anybody else. He knows all the players, all the details, and he's the one that kind of awakens everyone to hey guys, there's this really bad ring, we have to destroy it. So number 1, Gandalf.
Then we have 2 humans, Aragorn and Boromir. So I mentioned earlier about the king that was killed and his son that took the ring. So Aragorn is, the great grandson of those kings. He is the rightful king, but he is not reigning. He has not taken the throne. And then you have Boromir, who is the son of the steward. So since Gondor, that's the good place, Gondor good, Mordor bad, okay? So Boromir is the king of a steward, so the man that's in charge of Gondor, and he is wondering about this dream about a halfling, the Hobbit, and about this ring. So we'll talk more about Aragorn in a moment.
Moving forward, the next 2 guys in this fellowship are Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf. Right? So we paired them together to explain because these 2, in the beginning of their journey together, were very much enemies, at odds with one another. They belong to peoples that should not be getting along with one another, who have a bad history together. But it's through the mission that these guys went on together that these 2 actually became compatriots. And I feel like they're a great example of what it means to be a part of the church. You know, I don't know, like, if you're a part of a sports team, you generally know, like, the type of people that you're going to run into, depending on the sport. If you're a part of, like, an art club, you kind of know the type of people. But when you go to the church, you never know the type of people that are going to sit beside you, and the type of people that are going to become your compatriots, right? Same thing with Legolas and Gimli. They actually became friends to the point which, at the end of the whole thing, right? Spoiler alert. Once the ring got vanquished, they like went on vacation together, right? They went to each other's different homelands and places they wanted to see. They traveled together. Why? Because they bonded over the mission that they were on. If you ever want to encourage bonding to happen in the lives of your children, your friends, or yourself, find a group of people that you can have a project or a mission with. Often it might destroy you unless you stay in it long enough, kind of like marriage, and then it binds you in a way you never thought was possible.
And last but not least, we have the hobbits. So just a little bit on hobbit culture. They like to eat, they like to drink, they like to smoke, okay? They know how to have a good time. They like to share stories, and they really are into genealogy. Sometimes reading it when they're doing the genealogy parts, I'm like, I can't follow this. There's even family trees in the back of the book, okay? But it's just really cool that these are halflings, hobbits, and they're not really noticed in Middle-earth. As you read the story, people are surprised and shocked by these creatures. They sometimes mistaken them for like baby elves or some other creature. So in the fellowship, we have 4 hobbits. The 2 I will talk about are Frodo, who's Elijah Wood, and Sam, who is Sean Astin. Frodo is the one that is given the mission. He is the one that is given the ring. So everything falls on this hobbit. And it's kind of amazing because in the eyes of Middle-earth, he's kind of useless. And we will realize that's not the case. Tolkien is very good at kind of surprising us with what to expect. And then Sam, who I'm dressed up as. I don't have hairy feet. My mom tried to get me slippers, but they're hot. So, but that's why I have the frying pan, okay? But Sam is Frodo's gardener. And Sam, as Tolkien says, and I love this, is actually the hero. He is with Frodo through thick and thin. There are so many things that happen to Frodo, but Sam is usually the voice of hope for Frodo, and it's just an amazing companionship that you see happen. The movies do a pretty good job, but in the books there's more detail, obviously. You get to see Sam's thoughts, but it's just amazing how Tolkien uses these happy eating, drinking, smoking, creatures to show what it is that we desire. The other thing I'll say really quickly, because otherwise I'll forget, is that Tolkien said that out of all the things that he created, he was a hobbit in every way except his height.
Okay, and then the other 2 hobbits we have up here, of the 4, are Merry and Pippin. And basically Merry and Pippin, they're both in some way, shape, or form cousins of Frodo, and end up going on this mission with the Fellowship. You might ask, well, it makes sense that Sam, Frodo's close companion gardener, is with him to help support him. But why are we adding more hobbits to this fellowship? Why not have more warriors, right? Or more, wise wizards? Well, Tolkien, in his own wisdom, wrote this into the book when there was a conversation between Gandalf, the wizard, and this high-ranking elf named Elrond, right? Who was in charge of the council to decide how the ring should be taken to be destroyed, right? And he said, Gandalf convinced Lord Elrond, to take these 2 little hobbits, Merry and Pippin, into the company by saying, perhaps weapons and wisdom are not what is most needed in this mission. Perhaps it's friendship and fellowship that will succeed this task. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind about why this fellowship even exists. Why not just have Frodo on his own do this? There's something about friendship that Tolkien wants us to be aware of. Okay, you guys doing okay? All right, we have 3 more parts here, and then I think we'll take a quick break, right? So the first part, we're going to dive into this a little bit, but first off, how does the Catholic thing fit into the Lord of the Rings? You know, we can get into some other small examples and whatnot. Father Joachim and I had to kind of decide what avenue to kind of explore this talk. And we decided the one big way is to talk about where we see priest, prophet, and king in this story of the Lord of the Rings. Now, where else have we heard priest, prophet, and king? Jesus is always a good answer. You know, that was Jesus' identity. He was the priest, prophet, and king as the Messiah. And then we become a priest, prophet, and king when we get baptized. There you go. So I think what we're about to talk about is whenever you think about priest, prophet, and king, not only does this apply to these characters, but how do these characters teach us how to live out our own baptismal call? Okay? So number 1, Gandalf the prophet. So once again, who is Gandalf? Gandalf the Grey, standing there mysteriously, was the leader of the fellowship, and he's a wizard. But he's not just any ordinary old man. In Tolkien's world, he's actually like an angel, right? He's like an angel. In a story, sent to Middle-earth to be on a mission. And his particular mission was to give guidance and wisdom to those who would have to fight and destroy Sauron. Okay? So, number 1, he's the prophet because he's sent to be on mission to help others. And he has a message for them. But how does he do that? Right? Well, number 1, Gandalf has a unique quality to him because there's other wizards that were sent with him. Other angel-like creatures. But the unique thing about Gandalf is that he never settled and had a home. He was a wanderer. Literally, they call him, the elves call him the Grey Pilgrim, because he would just wander around, and he never had a home. Kind of like another person we know in the Gospels, Jesus. Because Gandalf went to those, Tolkien wrote, who were most in need of friendship. And in particular, Gandalf would go to those who were in need of friendship in terms of guidance and support whenever they needed it most. Now, Gandalf gets a bad rap, especially in the books, because he has this other nickname called Stormcrow. Because every time if you watch the movie or read the books, when Gandalf shows up, people are like, oh no, close the doors. We don't want him to come here. Why? Because he's generally going to tell us that bad news is coming. Right? Not because of him, but because Gandalf is aware of all the other goings-on. This is the unique thing about Gandalf that we can learn in our own lives. That in the Lord of the Rings, you have the dwarves and the elves and the men, and they're all staying in their own lane. They're all focused in their own little world. But Gandalf is aware of all of it. And he knows the dynamics and the moving parts, so that he recognizes things that nobody else is recognizing. One thing he recognizes especially are people who seem not to matter. For instance, the little hobbits. The little hobbits. There's something he has an affinity to, an attraction for hobbits, that no one else in Middle-earth seems to care about them. He's able to see things that other people don't see because he doesn't belong to anyone. He belongs to everyone. He's the prophet for everyone. Now, when you read the story of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf ends up in random situations where you're like, why does he care about this right now? For instance, in the story of The Hobbit, he's stirring up these these dwarves to go on a mission to take back their homeland and fight a dragon and get a bunch of gold. And you're like, why does Gandalf want to get involved in all this? Well, Gandalf is looking at other things going on, right? He's thinking, oh man, if this dragon that lives in this mountain teams up with Sauron, the main bad guy of the whole thing, this is going to be very bad. So he doesn't explain all that to everybody. He just says, hey, Thor and Oakenshield, I think you should take back the Lonely Mountain. Why don't you do that and I'll help you? Meanwhile, there's like a second thing happening. He always has deeper intentions than just what's going on. It's like getting your kids to go do something. And they're like, oh yeah, that would be fun. Meanwhile, they clean the whole room up in order to do that. And you're like, hey, good job. That's great. All right, so that's the first point with Gandalf. He's always seeing more deeply than everyone else. The second point of how and why he's a prophet and how we can be like a prophet is he sends people on commission. He's always calling people into adventure. He calls Thor and Oakenshield into adventure. He says, it's time for you to take back your homeland. He calls Bilbo into adventure and says, you can do this. You have the gifts, you have the abilities. He calls Frodo onto adventure, even to the point where he cannot promise any of these men, any of these beings, creatures, that they will come back. But he commissions them to go. Why? One, because he's one who's already been commissioned, so he calls them into adventure. And two, because he doesn't just commission them, he actually goes with them. And I think this is a great point for us. Hey, you should go back to church. Okay, yeah, I've been meaning to. I'll get to it. How well does that work? Or he says, hey, you should come with me. Come with me to church. Who else said, come with me, come and see? Jesus, right? When in doubt, that's the answer tonight, folks. Jesus. So Gandalf is the one who commissions and says, come with me on adventure. And I think our human Christian hearts especially are made for adventure. Are made for adventure. The second and most important thing about this commissioning that Gandalf does is Gandalf is a wizard of encouragement. He's a wizard of encouragement. How so? Well, Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings has this natural sense of kind of encouraging and sending people out that they'll be okay. But Tolkien also wrote into the story something not many people know, that Gandalf has a ring of power as well. A magical ring named Narya, right? And that ring has two chief powers that Tolkien writes. One, that it has the power of helping him with fire, to actually wield and do things with fire or be protected in certain ways from fire. But also, it has another kind of fire to it that Tolkien writes is the fire of encouragement. And I just want to read something to you from the Unfinished Tales of Tolkien that I think will help you capture what this power is. Tolkien writes this about Gandalf. Gandalf, warm and eager was his spirit, and it was enhanced by the ring Narya. For he was the enemy of Sauron, the main big bad guy who basically looks like an eyeball of fire. You know, Sauron is the bad fire guy, like hell. He's the devil. But Gandalf, opposing that fire of Sauron, which devours and wastes, with his own fire that kindles and succors and gives hope in times of distress. But his joy and his swift wrath were veiled in garments gray as ash, so that only those that knew him well glimpsed the flame that was within. What else does that sound like? Only those that know this veiled person well know the fire within. When you walk into Fatima, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool, you know, neat looking church. And people might say, yeah, look what's in this golden box. You're like, what's in there? It's kind of mysterious and veiled, not too ornamental, like whatever. But when you learn who's veiled within there, all of a sudden you discover a fire of encouragement you never thought existed. Merry he could be, but kindly to the young and simple, and yet at times sharp of speech and rebuking of folly. But he was not proud, and sought neither power nor praise, and thus far and wide he was beloved among all those that were not themselves proud. So Gandalf is a great man of encouragement. Now, why does this matter for us? Because as prophets in our prophetic call, in our baptismal call, we are called to give people encouragement. And how did Gandalf primarily do that? Simply through his presence. That in order to give encouragement to others, you don't always have to know what to say or what to do. But in the story of the Lord of the Rings, every time Gandalf is not there, people seem to be hopeless and afraid and subject to the tyranny of Sauron. But every time he shows up, people somehow seem to be more full-chested and willing to fight. And a great example of that is Gandalf's little speech he gives to King Theoden, right? For those of you that know the Lord of the Rings, you know what I'm about to read right now. Just a short little passage. That there's this king within one of the realms, Rohan, who is a good man. But just because of the evilness of the times and the culture and being pulled down by stress and anxiety, somehow got subdued, even possessed by one of the evil wizards, Saruman. And Gandalf hears about this and comes to his aid. Now, Gandalf doesn't force his own power, force his encouragement upon people. He doesn't just fix them, but he offers a hand of encouragement and says, will you come? Will you be commissioned with me? Sounds like somebody else that we know as well, right? So what does Gandalf say to King Theoden? And I think these are great words that the Lord would say to you when you go to pray. When you go to pray, listen to the Lord Jesus saying this to you. This is what Tolkien writes that Gandalf says to Theoden. Now King Theoden, son of Thengel, will you hearken to me? Said Gandalf. Do you ask for help? He lifted his staff and pointed to a high window. There all darkness seemed to clear, and through the opening could be seen high and far a patch of shining sky. This king who was oppressed in darkness for so long, Gandalf simply said, look up and see the light. Gandalf said this, not all is dark. Take courage, Lord of the Mark, for better help you will not find. No counsel have I to give to those that despair. Yet counsel I could give, and words I could speak to you. Will you hear them? Will you hear them? They are not for all ears. I bid you, come out before your doors and look abroad. Too long have you sat in shadows and trusted to twisted tales and crooked promptings. Gandalf is the prophet who commissions us and says, come. Come and be encouraged.
So, going with the priest, prophet, and king, we have Aragorn the king. As I mentioned earlier, he is the rightful king of Gondor, but because of certain circumstances, he has not taken the throne. If you've read the books or seen the movie, the hobbits are introduced to him, and he is known as Strider. He is a ranger that roams around, protecting the borders and protecting the free people.
This is just a quote from the book, Fellowship of the Ring, where Aragorn meets Boromir as he's dying. Boromir opened his eyes and strove to speak. At last, slow words came. I tried to take the ring from Frodo, he said. I am sorry. I have paid. His glance strayed to his fallen enemies. 20 at least lay there. They have gone. The halflings, the orcs have taken them. I think they are not dead. Orcs bound them. He paused and his eyes closed wearily. After a moment, he spoke again. Farewell, Aragorn. Go to Minas Tirith and save my people. I have failed. No, said Aragorn. taking his hand and kissing his brow. You have conquered. Few have gained such a victory. Be at peace. Your city shall not fall. Boromir smiled.
So Aragorn as king has two components, to serve and to heal. When we first meet him, the hobbits are in a little town, countryside, not too far from the Shire, called Bree. And they're being pursued by the Black Riders. These are men that have been consumed by rings of power and are seeking the one ring for Sauron. We see right off the bat that Aragorn is ready to serve. He is ready to lay down his life. He is ready to help these hobbits that he just met. When there's a lot of spoilers, so just so you know, if you haven't seen the movie, it's been out for 20 years, and the book has been published almost for 70. So some spoilers. But we realize that when Gandalf dies, don't worry, he comes back. I know. I guess he didn't get that far in the book yet.
Nothing safe.
So we realize, though, that once Gandalf dies, Aragorn takes command. He is ready to continue the mission. And we see again and again, he is ready to serve. He is ready to find a way to make sure that this ring will be destroyed. And then, for me personally, as a priest, I love the healing aspect. I love that he is able to heal. When Frodo is running with the other hobbits and Aragorn, he gets stabbed by a cursed blade. And Aragorn is able to go find a plant called Kingsfoil to heal him. Now, it doesn't heal him completely, but it is a healing aspect. And then when a battle happens, these people that have been injured are brought to the healing houses, and Aragorn goes through all the soldiers, healing them with the king's foil. This sounds like, to me, the sacrament of the anointing of the sick. So to realize that he wants to make sure that these people are in a healthy state, that he will do whatever is in his ability to make sure that he is serving them, and then that they're also safe. And then my personal favorite, if you've heard me preach, you know I preach on confession. I hear chuckling, so you know it's true. Okay. Is that the death of Boromir. I love that scene. Okay? So, as Boromir looks like a pincushion.
It's this scene right here.
It is such a good scene. Okay? So, Boromir has been corrupted by the ring. He is a man that is concerned about his family, he's concerned about his country, and he is pretty much at the point that, let's use the ring, we can use it for good, there will be no consequences. But we know that's not the case. The only person that can use the ring without being corrupted, because he's already corrupt, is Sauron. So, the thing is that he has a moment of weakness, and he scares Frodo away. And I think this might be like, what, the third or fourth time Frodo uses the ring? So, he hasn't used it too often, but he uses the ring to get away at this point. All of a sudden, they're being attacked by orcs, and Boromir is protecting Merry and Pippin. And he, as we heard from the little snippet, he killed some 20-odd orcs, okay? But he's just stuck with arrows. But the thing that is beautiful is that his last breath, he is able to confess. He is able to say that I had a moment of weakness. He's able to say that I have sinned, that I have desired something that is wrong. I have gone out of my way to do an evil act. And Aragorn, instead of saying, "You idiot, what were you thinking?" gives him a moment to realize that you are forgiven. Yes, you had a moment of weakness. Yes, you went after something that is complete and total evil. But you redeemed yourself. And that shows us that we are able to be redeemed. And that is what I love about this service and healing. They go hand in hand. To realize that as a priest, I can forgive sins through my ordination, but how powerful is forgiveness? How powerful is it to be able to serve someone that you'd rather walk away from? Aragorn could have just been, "I'm Strider, I'm doing my thing." Okay? He doesn't need to seek the throne. He doesn't need to do anything as a king. But before he takes the throne, we see that he is a man of service, that he's a man of healing, that he desires that people be whole, that people be complete. He wants to give that sense of comfort, he wants to give a sense of security, and he will do it by any means. As the Council of Elrond, that awesome scene, you have my sword. But before that, he says, "By my life or death, if I can protect you, I will." And that is what a king does. A king comes to serve, not to be served. So if you've been at the baptism prep, or if you've seen me baptize, I try to remind parents that at some point your kids will serve, just not now. Okay? You have to serve them. But to realize that that is what we are called for. We are called to a life of service. A life of service and a life to heal, to forgive, and to love.
Very good. One more point, and then short break. Last person, priest. What? Oh gosh, that's what we're supposed to do now. So, the priest is last. We already did prophet and king. So who's the priest? Frodo. This is the quote I picked for talking about the priesthood of Frodo, very from the beginning of the whole book. This is Frodo sharing on what it means for him to leave this place he loves, leaves the Shire. He says this: "I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again."
So the objective or the whole purpose of a priest is to sacrifice. And we realize that if, reading Old Testament, that the priest would offer animal sacrifices. But eventually we come to realize that with the sacrifice of Christ, he is priest and victim, that he offers himself. So it is not hard to just kind of realize that the ring is the cross, that the ring is sin, that the ring is death. So we realize that Frodo sacrifices himself, sacrifices his desires to be able to take this ring to Mount Doom. And it's kind of interesting to see how it happens, because Bilbo is able to have a great fun journey with the dwarves, comes back, lives a great life, and then he's like, "Peace," and leaves. And then Frodo's like, "Okay, cool." And then Gandalf's like, "Yeah, about that ring Bilbo had, it's evil." And Frodo's like, "Oh, cool, okay." So he makes up a plan to go to Rivendell, which is a place where the elves live. And he makes it there, and he's like, "Okay, I've done my duty, I'm done. Wipe my hands of this. Awesome. I'm going back to Crick Hollow," that's his new house, "and going to live my life out, no problems." But then at the Council of Elrond, when they're talking about how to destroy the ring, they mention different ways of how to go about it. Do you want to mention those?
You do it.
Okay. So somebody suggests like, well, throw it into the ocean. And it's like, well, eventually it'll be found again. In the movie, you don't meet this character, but there's a character called Tom Bombadil. He's a fun one. The ring has no power over him, so they suggest that, well, we'll give the ring to Tom Bombadil. And Gandalf's like, yeah, he's nice and everything, but he has no concern for the ring, so he'll probably forget it, and it'll just end up... I don't see him, so...
Giving the ring to Tom Bombadil would be like giving the ring to Father Jean-Luc. He'd be like, hey, yeah, thanks. Oh wait, where did we put that? I forgot.
The deacon said it.
That one.
Yeah, the Benedictine deacon said it. But it's not far from the truth.
Is this being recorded? No,
So, and then they like have a few other ideas, but they realize that it would just be pushing the problem along, that it needs to be destroyed. And then there's elves, dwarves, men at this council, and they all start arguing. And then Frodo realizes what he has to do. It is going to be Frodo, the little hobbit from the Shire, from Bag End, that lives under the hill, that's going to take the most evil thing known in Middle-earth and to go on a mission to destroy it. We see that he sacrifices everything. He sacrifices his life, he sacrifices his comfort, and he realizes that he needs to be the one to go on this mission. But if you've read the book, or if you've seen the movie, ready for the...
Oh, I have an idea.
He fails. And it is so frustrating that he has been stabbed by a black rider, okay, by a cursed sword. He fights wolves, he fights mountain trails, goblins, orcs. He gets stabbed by a spider and is paralyzed, makes it through all of this to fail. Right at the moment when he needs to drop the ring. And not only does he fail, but he decides, I will take the ring. The ring is mine.
So with that being said, why did Tolkien write in that Frodo would fail? And I would propose to you that Tolkien wrote in that Frodo would fail so that he could point to who the actual main character is in The Lord of the Rings. And to hear that, come back after a couple-minute break. Father Canese, come on down. Coming back to our perhaps our last point for this evening, and then we'll have some Q&A. And I already had one really good question, right? So one really good question that we won't answer now, but just to debate you for that, we'll answer this at the end. Someone asked, look at that. Someone asked, did Tolkien intentionally write this to be a Christian or a Catholic story? Did he take these concepts and then try to write characters into that? Or did he just kind of write this story and all of a sudden like realize what was happening? So we can answer that question at the end. All right, so moving into this, right, where have we come from? We talked about Tolkien, that he was a great Catholic author, who wrote this story called The Lord of the Rings, including The Hobbit, right, which is about this fellowship taking this ring to destroy it. And there's three main characters that we've decided to focus on. Gandalf, the prophet. And what does he show us? That the prophet is called to be on mission, to call others on mission, and to encourage with their own presence those around them. Then we have Aragorn the king, who both is a king of service and a king of healing, who offers his life not in control and authority, but in servitude to bring others freedom. And then the last one we just talked about was Frodo the priest, who accepted that he knew that what he would do with his life would take all of his life for the rest of his life. But where we ended was, dun dun dun, the failure of Frodo. And I don't know about you guys, but I first watched the movies before I read the books. My dad introduced me to the movies whenever I was a young boy. And actually, side note, which is pretty cool, my dad got to go to, my dad's here right now, he's over there. For work, he got to go to New Zealand a couple years back. And he was able to find his way to Bag End, which actually, if you go to New Zealand, there's still certain places like Hobbiton where they've preserved it. And you can go on tours. And I remember I was in the monastery as a junior monk, and my dad FaceTiming me from New Zealand. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to get in trouble for leaving wherever I'm supposed to be, but I need to do it anyway. So I'm like walking around FaceTiming with my dad, and the connection is real bad. But there's a picture, which I should have had prepared to show you. There's a picture of my dad standing in the door of a hobbit hole with the phone and my face on it. And I was like, oh, I have a picture of me in a hobbit hole. So I just wanted to say that about my dad. But anyway, the failure of Frodo. Where we left this was, why would Tolkien write in that Frodo failed? Well, perhaps it's because, once again, Tolkien said about stories and myths and fairy tales that there's something in them that draws all of our hearts to look for certain deep themes like resurrection, eternal love, supernatural world. But Tolkien thought there's one part of stories that always seems to maybe not sit with us completely. Is sometimes it's hard to identify with the hero who has this great overcoming thing without any failure. Because at times, all of us, sinners, we fail, even in great ways. And Tolkien wrote this in, I think, and others like Peter Kreeft, a great philosopher, thinks to point to the actual main character of The Lord of the Rings. And I would propose to you that the main character in The Lord of the Rings is God. Oh, God? Where's God in The Lord of the Rings? He's not mentioned at all. Which God are you talking about? Yeah, that God perhaps is the main character in the whole Lord of the Rings, even though God, there's a kind of God in the myth. We're not going to get into all that. But who is God in the Lord of the Rings? Well, if you look at the story, you realize that there's something in there that the whole story seems to be about. Namely, divine providence. That there's certain powers and things going on that are constantly referenced to. A little hat is tipped toward throughout the course of the whole story. I'd like to read one or two of those to you from the book. This is Gandalf on Providence, talking to our dear Frodo about the ring finding its way away from Gollum and somehow to Bilbo. Frodo said, "What? The ring left Gollum just in time to meet Bilbo? Wouldn't an orc have suited it better?" "It is no laughing matter," said Gandalf. "Not for you. It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time, and putting his hand on it blindly in the dark. There was more than one power at work, Frodo." This is also Gandalf on Providence. "I can put it not plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker, who was Sauron, the evil lord. In which case, Frodo, you also were meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought. Divine providence, really, whenever you realize that that's kind of the main theme of the story, it strikes you everywhere that you look. Even, what's the innkeeper's name? Butterbird. He forgets to, give like a note to Frodo or something, and then all of a sudden he remembers at a certain specific time that there's things in the story that Tolkien writes in that for no reason this should have happened. There's no authority or control that could have made this happen, except for the will of some power greater than all the rest. Now you might say, all right, well, then what does that mean for the main character? Well, if you see, how did the ring actually get destroyed? Frodo puts the ring on and says, it is mine. And he begins to leave. And Sam is like crestfallen, heartbroken, like, no, what do I do? He had no ability to stop Frodo, even if he wanted to. It's his friend, who knows? But who's still around that should not be around? Gollum, Smeagol, my precious. There, I did it, okay? That's what I'm going to do. Gollum, who does not deserve to still be alive, who by no right should still be around. But Gandalf reminds Frodo again that it's by the pity of Bilbo that Gollum is still around. And Frodo, that word of pity that Gandalf gave to him, stayed with him so that even Frodo throughout the whole story keeps showing Gollum pity. Doesn't mean he trusts him the whole way, but he still offers him mercy, offers him pity. And I propose to you that this is our role and our participation in divine providence. That God is in charge, but we still have to engage. How? By being like God. By showing mercy and pity to those especially who don't deserve it. Why? Because perhaps they still have a role to play, for good or for ill. And in this case, of all the stories in the whole Lord of the Rings, it's really two acts of pity, we may say, that are just kind of written in, that are the main acts that destroy the ring. Not the great deeds of the wizards, not the great battles of men, elves, and dwarves, but simple acts of pity and mercy by two little hobbits toward a creature that by no means didn't deserve to live. Because without Gollum being there, and even his evil will oppressing, desiring, the ring... Oh, so by the way, what happened was Frodo put the ring on, and then Gollum was able to identify him invisible and attack him, bite the ring off his finger, and in his rejoicing, right, ends up falling into Mount Doom, which is where the ring needed to go in the first place. So while the story would have sounded better if Frodo would have walked up with the ring and said, there you go, we're done. Yeah, we're going to Disneyland. Instead, it was written in so that this kind of messy situation that we often find our own selves in, our messy lives, messy relationships, messy sins, are what we can offer to the Lord in His own divine providence, that He's not overcome by them, but He still even works through them. What is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the world? That God became man, and then we horribly tortured and murdered Him. We call that day Good Friday. Why? Because from the worst thing that ever happened, the greatest thing ever happened. From the worst thing that could have happened in the Lord of the Rings, Frodo, our dude, the main character, betrays at the last second. From that, we still get the greatest thing that happened. That the ring was still destroyed. Not because of us, not because of Frodo, but because of this divine providence that's written into the story. In the pity that is the participation, kind of even in the past, cashed in this mysterious weaving of the story. So I would propose to you that God and his divine providence is the main player in the Lord of the Rings, even though not explicitly mentioned at any point. It's more like even the magic in the Lord of the Rings isn't like referenced directly really at all that much. Kind of like other stories that have wands and different things. Still a good story. Anyway, it's like Peter Kreeft likes to say, it's like a fish in water. It's just the environment of the whole thing. That's like God's presence in this mysterious divine providence of the whole thing. That God is just present in the whole foundation of the story, so that Tolkien doesn't have to be all flashy and explain, here's God. He's in the entire story of the Lord of the Rings. So here's the last thing I'll say, and I'll give it to Father Joachim to say some things, and then we'll go to maybe some Q&A or comments or whatever. All right, what's one more application point we can take from this story of the Lord of the Rings? Well, what's our greatest participation in God's mission for us? Divine providence. We mentioned pity. What's an expression of how we're called to do that? To live the virtuous life. Well, what's the greatest virtuous life we can live? Well, what are the greatest virtues are there? The theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity or love. So where's faith in the Lord of the Rings? Well, what is faith? Faith isn't simply just like an intellectual believing, but faith is placing your trust in somebody else. Your trust of your own happiness, your own destiny, your own life in the hands of another, that it'll be okay. Where do we see that? In the fellowship. They place their whole lives in one another. We place our whole trust in Frodo to get this done. Not in an idea, but in a person, in one another. Ultimately, in God. Faith in the Lord of the Rings. Hope. Where's hope in Lord of the Rings? It's all over the place. Especially hope. They're basically hopeless multiple times throughout the book. And what is hope? I think hope is maybe especially seen in Moria. Moria is this complete place of darkness. The place where they lose their great encourager. How much worse could they have left this place of darkness than leaving Gandalf, who died there? Spoiler alert. But what is hope? Hope is not comfort. Hope is not having a backup plan. Hope is, I don't know how this darkness will end, but I somehow trust that it will. That's hope. And where is love in the Lord of the Rings? Once again, all over the place. Father Joachim and I were in the rectory talking back and forth at different places. The one place I really love to identify love, especially, is at the very end, the Black Gate. Anyway, I'm not going to read that. At the Black Gate, they have to decide, after all these battles, the Fellowship is trying to figure out, well, what do we do? How do we get Frodo more time to take the ring, to destroy it? And of course, the plan has come up with, well, let's just walk up to the front door of Sauron and knock. And he'll look at us and not look at our buddy Frodo. We'll offer ourselves for the sake of our brother. The sacrificial love is at the heart of all the Lord of the Rings. In the heart of the priest, prophet, and king, who each and every one of them basically die. Frodo dies in a way that he can't come back to normal. His soul is killed by the ring, really. His spirit, he has to go off at the end of the story. Gandalf literally dies. He comes back, but he dies, right? And Aragorn even has to die. Goes into the valley of death, where no one else could go. That death is a theme there, but that new life and divine providence are riddled with faith, hope, and love.
So I hope that everybody's going to read the book, okay? It can be a challenge. And the thing I find with that is that it's not immediate gratification. As I mentioned, it takes 17 years for Frodo to start his journey, okay? But there's something about that story. There's something about that journey that I think we're all drawn to. And we realize that even in the story, Sam and Frodo have a great conversation, and I'm going to paraphrase, but Sam starts wondering, Mr. Frodo, do you think that they'll write a story about us, that they'll sing songs about, Frodo and the One Ring? And he's like, probably, maybe. And Sam just finds it amazing that he's living a story. And I love the little interaction that Frodo then says, yes, and they will want to hear about Samwise the Brave. And Sam is almost like a little hurt. Like, Mr. Frodo, I was being honest. And Frodo says back to him, so was I. They realize that they're in this journey together, that they are on this mission. And I think that if we realize that, okay, their fellowship was 9 people, but we do form a fellowship. We do have this mission. We are on this journey. The thing is that we may not need to destroy a ring of evil. We may not be dealing with a dark lord Sauron. But the mission that we are on, the importance of this story that has not yet finished, is that we are called to be saints. And I think that reading The Lord of the Rings helps us realize that. So no matter where we find ourselves, no matter when we seem that there is no hope, another moment where there is just lack of hope is Shelob's Lair. Okay, here's a little side note. Tolkien seemed to hate spiders. He uses them as villains all the time. When he was about 3 or 4, he picked up a tarantula and it bit him. So I think that might be the reason. Okay? But when he is, Frodo gets stung by this huge spider, he's paralyzed, and Sam has to take up Frodo's sword, Sting, and then he has a file that's given to him by an elf that is Starlight, and he goes into the darkness, ready to fight. Even though he doesn't have a clue what he's going to do, he has no idea what is the next step. And I think that speaks to us. That even though we may not know the next step, that maybe we don't know the whole plan, we do know our mission. We do know our purpose. We do know the end goal. And that is to build each other up, to become saints, and to live this fellowship to the fullest.
Amen.
Amen.
So maybe if there's any interest in a couple questions, we'll take a few questions or comments. The first one, though, I promise that we'd answer is, Father Joachim, did Tolkien write this as a Christian allegory, or did he kind of just write the story and then realize, like, oh, there's kind of a lot of Christianity in this?
Tolkien hated allegory. So, not to pick on C.S. Lewis, I do enjoy C.S. Lewis. But the thing is, to understand what allegory is that, has everybody either read or seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
Yes, Narnia.
Okay, Narnia, okay? Aslan, Jesus, okay? There's no doubt about it, that's what C.S. Lewis is going for. So you'll notice that as we spoke tonight, we talked about different aspects of Christ, but with different characters. So Tolkien wasn't like, okay, this equals that, this equals this. And C.S. Lewis and Tolkien would argue about their writing styles and their stories. But to realize that, like, it is very Catholic, this story, but he wasn't trying to just substitute people in the Bible into Lord of the Rings.
Any questions?
comments?
I do know that there's one question that I was also asked. The Eagles. If you've read the books, or not Philadelphia Eagles, but I know that if you've read the books or you've seen the movies, that you have these huge eagles that seem to solve all of Gandalf's problems, along with the hobbits. So if a hobbit won't work, an eagle will, and if an eagle won't work, a hobbit will. So those are his two solutions. But the thing is that these eagles are in the same class as Gandalf. So Gandalf is this angelic being, and so are these other creatures. So the eagles have their own free will. When Gandalf is taken prisoner early in the book, an eagle comes to rescue him. But he doesn't order the eagle to oh, I need to get to the Shire, drop me off there. He asks, how far will you be willing to take me? And then he's dropped off at Rohan, gets a horse, and then goes to the Shire. Also, people will ask, okay, Boromir had it right. Nobody just walks into Mordor. Why don't you fly? To realize that Sauron is on the lookout. He is ready to attack anything that's going to come in. When Frodo, Sam, and Gollum get to Mount Doom, it's through the back staircase, through this unknown door where nobody has been for centuries, pretty much, okay? And also you have Shelob, that huge spider, guarding the entrance. So the eagles would not have helped. Pretty much they would have flown into Mordor and then been boom, shot down, done, okay? So the eagles are not a plot device to help in the situation.
Anything else?
Do you have a question? Oh, so you fix your glasses.
Yes, question back there. Yes.
Gandalf the White dead at the end because I thought he was leading everybody onto the ship to return.
So Gandalf
Was he dead?
died in Moria, but was sent back to finish his mission, and then at the end went to the Grey Havens.
So he was dead.
Good question. Was he actually dead? And he couldn't really die because he's an angelic kind of being, so he was still alive.
Wasn't he leading all the people that were passing onto the ship to return?
Yes. So he was going to heaven in a sense, yes. For kind of an eternal living. Yes.
Surprised you never mentioned when Eowyn kills the Witch King.
Oh,
That not
that's a great point.
the head is crushed.
Joachim, go ahead.
So the Witch King, so really quick, you have 9 rings that were given to mortal men, and the rings consume them, and they become ring wraiths, okay? So they're pretty much just spirit. And what happens is that you have the Witch King, who is the leader. But the thing is that an elf, I think it was Glorfindel, okay, I'm just checking my sources, makes a prophecy that he will not be killed by a man. He gets killed by a hobbit and a woman. So earlier in the book, we don't get this in the movie, but the hobbits are pretty much kidnapped by these wraiths. So there are these spirit things in this hill country, and Tom Bombadil, who I mentioned earlier, finds these swords and gives them to the hobbits. But these are special swords. These were swords that were created to fight the ringwraiths. So in the battle, what happens is you have, let's see, she's with Merry. Yes, because Pippin's in Gondor. Okay, so Merry stabs him like in the leg, and that breaks his power because he's stabbed by this sword. And then Eowyn, who is from Rohan, is able to kill. So this is really easy imagery for us to see as Merry just right on the snake's head. So we realize that she is able to kill this, being of evil. So there you go. Thank you for the question.
I have a question.
Go.
Now, I came here blind. I've never read the books. I've never seen the movies. Do you start with The Hobbit? And is that the whole story? You have to start at the beginning, right?
So the question was how to go about reading the books. So I would suggest start with The Hobbit. The Hobbit was originally written for children. He wrote it for his kids. And eventually it was suggested get it published. And that was published, I think, in 1937, if I remember correctly. Then the rest of The Lord of the Rings wasn't published until like 1953 and 1954. So he took some time to work on things. This is a man that would take days writing the history of one word in a language that he made up. So he's a little bit on the meticulous side. But I would suggest start with The Hobbit. It's a fun, quick little read. And then go into The Lord of the Rings. Now, if you want to go deeper, you have the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales. There's even like the whole history of Middle Earth, which is like 5 books. But it depends on how deep you want to go. And then also, if you don't like to read, Andy Serkis, who played Gollum, did a reading of the books. So you can hear him do the voices of the characters, and he even sings. Tolkien wrote a lot of songs, okay? So, a lot of poetry.
One more question, Karen?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis become Catholic because of his association with Tolkien, and did he write Narnia after learning about Jesus and God from Tolkien?
So all that is true, other than Lewis did not become Catholic. I believe he was Anglican, right? I think today he would have been Catholic, but Anglicanism was, of course, the popular religion, especially at that time in England. So, but yeah, because of Tolkien, he came to Jesus, for sure.
So he wrote Narnia after?
There's a large appendix at the end of each book. And there's so much information in there because I had so many questions that the appendix really answered.
This is just the appendix, and he also has an index for names, places, and weapons.
There you go.
I think that's pretty much it. All right, thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. It was a wonderful night. Special thanks to Brother Barnabas and Father Joachim, to Teresa, Pia, Krista, Trish, to Chuck, and Laura, everyone who helped.